By the spring of 1940, the world seemed to be breaking in half. Across Europe, empires that had taken centuries to build collapsed in a matter of weeks. Borders meant nothing anymore. Flags were torn down, replaced almost overnight by unfamiliar symbols fluttering above conquered cities. Armies that once boasted millions of men laid down their weapons after brief, brutal campaigns. Roads filled with refugees. Radios crackled with surrender announcements. The rhythm of war had become terrifyingly efficient. The invaders called it momentum. They struck with speed the world had never witnessed. Columns of armor rolling day and night, aircraft screaming overhead, paratroopers falling from grey skies like iron rain. Their doctrine was simple: overwhelm the enemy before resistance could even form. Shock, confusion, and fear did the rest. It worked everywhere. Poland fell. Denmark folded in hours. France trembled. Each victory reinforced the belief that no force in Europe could stand against them. Their commanders grew confident, almost careless. The maps on their war tables were marked with arrows that pointed only forward. Then someone pointed north. Norway was never meant to be a battlefield, at least not a difficult one. To the invaders, it was a cold, underpopulated land clinging to the edge of Europe. Poor roads, small towns, an outdated military, strategically useful, yes, but militarily insignificant. A stepping stone. They believed Norway would fall the way the others had, quickly, quietly, and without consequence. They were wrong. At dawn, warships slipped into Norway's long, narrow fjords, their grey hulls slicing through black, icy water. The mountains rose on either side like ancient sentinels, silent and unmoving. Snow still covered the high ground, and mist clung to the cliffs, swallowing sound and distance. Paratroopers jumped into freezing air. Infantry units disembarked into unfamiliar terrain. Orders were clear: secure ports, seize roads, push inland. But almost immediately, something felt different. The land did not open itself to invasion. Roads twisted sharply, climbing into mountain passes where vehicles slowed to a crawl. Forests were dense and dark, swallowing columns of men within minutes. Maps proved unreliable, distances lied, and what looked close on paper took hours or days to reach. And then the resistance began, not with grand battles, with absence. Convoys advanced toward key objectives, then found bridges destroyed moments before arrival. Supply trucks vanished between towns. Patrols sent ahead to clear the way never returned, their radios falling silent one by one. Shots echoed from cliffs no one had thought to search. A single rifle crack could halt an entire column. The invaders soon realized they weren't being fought by a conventional army. They were being hunted by men who knew every ridge, every frozen stream, every narrow path carved into stone. Norwegian soldiers, poorly equipped but stubborn, used the land as their greatest weapon. Hunters turned snipers, farmers turned saboteurs. Ski troops moved silently over snow where mechanized units bogged down helplessly. They appeared suddenly, struck hard, and vanished into terrain that refused to give them up. Every step forward came at a cost. And the weather offered no mercy. Cold gnawed at exposed skin. Snow blinded optics. Engines froze overnight. Frostbite claimed fingers faster than bullets. The invaders had planned for resistance, but not for a country that seemed determined to fight them with ice and stone as much as with men. Among the troops, a strange unease spread. This was not fear of defeat. It was the sense of being unwelcome. Locals watched silently from windows. Villages emptied before occupation. Guides led columns down the wrong paths. Information leaked away faster than it could be gathered. Whispers began to circulate in the ranks. This land had warriors once, long ago, raiders, sailors, men who crossed oceans with nothing but wood, iron, and will. The name returned like a half-forgotten ghost. Vikings. Not as myth, but as memory. As days passed, the realization became unavoidable. Norway was not collapsing like the others. It was slowing the invasion, grinding it down minute by minute. Every delay mattered. Every ambush bought time the invaders could not afford to lose. What was supposed to be a swift operation had turned into a struggle against terrain, weather, and a people who refused to vanish quietly into history. They had conquered empires with speed. But in Norway, speed meant nothing, because the land, and the men who belonged to it, had decided to stand. The battles that followed were never meant to be remembered. There were no sweeping tank charges across open plains, no massive encirclements broadcast to the world. What happened in Norway in 1940 unfolded in fragments, isolated clashes scattered across mountains, fjords, forests and frozen roads. Too small for headlines, too slow for propaganda. But for those who fought them, these battles were unforgettable. Every advance inland felt like stepping deeper into a trap that could not be seen, only felt. Supply columns moved cautiously now, engines idling low, soldiers scanning ridge lines and tree lines that all looked the same. Snow absorbed sound, fog distorted distance. 100 places to hide, 1,000 angles to shoot from. Then the firing would start, a single shot, sometimes two, enough to drop a man, halt a convoy, force officers to deploy troops into terrain that punished every mistake. By the time defensive positions were established, the attackers were gone, leaving behind silence, spent casings, and the creeping certainty that they were being watched. One of the most critical moments came not from overwhelming force, but stubborn refusal. At a narrow road near Midskogen, a small group of Norwegian soldiers and volunteers, men with mismatched uniforms and limited ammunition, stood in the path of elite troops advancing toward a decisive objective. They were outnumbered, outgunned, cut off. They held anyway. Trees were felled across the road. Snow was packed down into firing positions. Orders were simple: delay them, just delay them. And they did. Hour after hour they resisted. Shots echoed through the forest. Grenades burst against rocks and trunks. The attackers pushed forward again and again, only to be halted by men who refused to yield ground they had decided to die on. That delay changed everything, because time was the true currency of the campaign, and Norway was stealing it. Farther north the fighting grew harsher still. Narvik became a name whispered with bitterness. Control of the iron routes turned the surrounding fjords into deadly corridors. Naval engagements erupted in waters so narrow ships could not easily maneuver. Smoke rose from burning hulls against sheer cliffs. Snowstorms swallowed aircraft. Sailors froze to death before rescue could reach them. Here, modern warfare collided violently with ancient geography. The mountains allowed no easy victory. Every peak became a potential observation post. Every valley funneled movement into kill zones. Ski troops moved silently across terrain considered impassable, appearing behind enemy lines with devastating effect. The invaders took ground, but never without resistance, and even when towns fell, the fighting did not truly stop. Occupation brought control, but not submission. Rail lines were sabotaged in the night. Supply depots burned mysteriously. Messages vanished. Information flowed outward through hidden networks, carried by fishermen, couriers on skis, civilians who pretended to comply while quietly resisting. The land itself became unreliable. Guides led units astray. Weather reports failed. Roads collapsed. What should have been secure rear areas remained dangerous, forcing thousands of troops to be tied down in defensive roles rather than advancing elsewhere. Commanders grew frustrated. Reports sent back to headquarters reflected a shift in tone. Norway was no longer described as weak or backward. It was labeled problematic, difficult, resource-intensive. A drain. That alone was a kind of victory, because elsewhere in Europe, the invaders relied on speed, on breaking enemies before they could react. In Norway, speed bled away into caution, momentum slowed. Plans had to be rewritten, and the cost kept climbing, not just in casualties, but in morale. Soldiers spoke of the cold with dread, of nights when they felt eyes on them from the dark forests, of ambushes that came without warning and ended before retaliation was possible. This was not war as they had trained for it. This was endurance warfare. And the Norwegians were built for it. When the campaign finally ended and the world moved on to louder, bloodier fronts, Norway slipped into the background of history. Its battles were overshadowed by larger invasions, greater losses, and more dramatic turning points. But the impact remained. The king had escaped. The government survived. Resistance networks endured. Allied forces gained time and intelligence that would matter later. And the myth of effortless conquest had been cracked. Among veterans there was a shared understanding. They had destroyed entire empires with speed and terror. But in Norway, they had faced something older than modern war. A people shaped by cold, distance, and defiance. A land that refused to surrender easily. A legacy not written in conquest, but in survival. The Vikings had not returned with axes and longships. They had returned as farmers with rifles, sailors with messages, soldiers who refused to disappear. And in the frozen battles of 1940, they proved something the world would not fully understand until much later. Some empires fall fast, others don't fall at all. They simply endure, waiting for the moment history remembers them again.